And this is a big day in Washington. Trump will be delivering his State of the Union address, his first to the now divided Congress. It's a week behind schedule because of the partial government shutdown. Now, that shutdown lasted 35 days, and there could be another one. So joining me now to talk more about Donald Trump's speech tonight is Aaron Blake. He's a senior political reporter for The Washington Post. Thank you for being with us, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
So first, let's start with what you are watching for tonight as Trump makes his State of the Union address.
Well, the big word from the White House, at least so far, is that he is going to offer something of a unifying message, more of a high-minded speech talking about bipartisanship. It's a very difficult circle to square in this case, especially with the backdrop of the shutdown that we just went through, especially with the fact that we have another one looming 10 days away in which both sides seem to be rather dug in, seem to be in very much the same position they were on this a month and a half ago, which is the president demanding a border wall, the president not allowing for that to go forward without a border wall. And so, you know, we can talk all day about coming together, but until you can actually reach these kinds of agreements, it's going to be very difficult for Washington to actually move forward in any real way.
And speaking of coming together, we should also point out that Trump is going to be walking into a House controlled by Democrats with Nancy Pelosi sitting right behind him. So what sort of tone do you expect him to take?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you look at his speech last year, there was a lot of the kind of unifying rhetoric. There was at least an olive branch to Democrats talking about bringing people together. You know, I would expect that he goes for that because he got so much positive press from the State of the Union last year. But making it actually happen is another matter entirely. And I think that there is a growing degree of skepticism here with that because of not just how the things have gone the last 2 years, but because of what the president has said in recent days. Just a couple days ago, he gave an interview in which he talked about how Nancy Pelosi didn't actually care about human trafficking coming across the border. I mean, there are political differences, and then there are attacking your opponents for who they are as people and for being uncaring, immoral individuals. And so when the president says things like that, it really poisons the well. So I don't see a whole lot of hope for any kind of a kumbaya moment here.
And you know, Aaron, sort of speaking of those personal attacks, and sometimes this U.S. president has a tendency to go off on a tangent, are we expecting to see a more straight arrow teleprompter reading Donald Trump tonight? I mean, we did see sort of a bit of a zigzagging President Trump when he was doing an interview over the weekend. So what will we see tonight?
Yeah, if you look at the speech a year ago, he did actually stay on prompter. He didn't ad-lib like he does sometimes. I think he recognizes the gravity of these speeches to some degree. He recognizes that those little ad-libs and asides can really distract from the broader message, and he likes the platform that he gets with the State of the Union. I think it's part of the reason why he agreed to open the government, because he actually wanted to give this speech this week. And so Kellyanne Conway, his advisor this morning, said that there was no reason for him to go off script and to ad-lib during this speech. I think that's a pretty good indication of how the president feels about these things, and that we're going to get pretty much the speech that they're going to have written and going to be releasing in all likelihood before the speech is actually delivered.
Now, you touched on the government shutdown, and certainly we saw that the U.S. president, his approval rating suffered because of that. Do you think that he's viewing this sort of as a moment to reset a little, to get popularity back, to maybe raise that border wall again with people who are watching?
Yeah, I think there's no question that he sees it like that. He's very conscious of his personal popularity. This is an opportunity for him to have the entire country looking, even in a way that he didn't a few weeks ago when he gave a prime time address. At the same time, you know, this is a president who is still dealing with the same situation that the country found themselves in last month with that 35-day shutdown. This is not a situation that has been resolved. So I think the biggest question here is, how much does he bring up the wall during this speech? How much does he keep pressing that case forward? If he does talk about the wall extensively, that'll be a good sign that things are really not going to be changing. If he doesn't talk about it very much, I think that'll be a pretty good sign that he's probably given up on a legislative fix for the wall. Maybe he's looking forward to possibly declaring a national emergency. I think the content of this speech will give a good signal about exactly how hard he intends to keep pushing for this wall.
And speaking of him, you know, there's some speculation that he could be calling for a national emergency and that he might hint at it within the realms of this speech. Do you think that there would be a lot of fallout of that, especially because that could lead to another shutdown potentially?
Yeah, I think that, for one, it seems unlikely that he would declare a national emergency in this speech. There's been some talk about that. There are still 10 days to go in these negotiations. That would really be throwing in the towel rather early. But this is something that he has repeatedly threatened to do. I think he sees it as an opportunity to get leverage in the legislative debate, maybe forcing Democrats to come to his side on the issue of the border wall. But I don't see this as something that Democrats are particularly worried about. This is actually something that increasingly, talking about the national emergency declaration, is splitting Republicans who worry about the president doing this and setting a precedent for maybe a future Democratic president to use the same portion of the law to launch national emergencies for climate change, for many other issues that maybe they wouldn't agree with. They certainly worry about the extension of the presidential power on this. And so even just, you know, throwing aside the government funding debate and declaring a national emergency to end it all would not be an easy political move for the president.
And just very finally, I wanted to also ask, in terms of the Muller investigation looming over this entire address, do you think that's something that he may talk about or may touch on? We've got the indictment of Roger Stone. Cohen is set to also testify this week.
Yeah, the rule of thumb with the president is that he doesn't like to talk about these things, so he generally doesn't bring them up unless he feels like he has to or he has to defend himself. I think perhaps the most interesting subplot here, as far as the investigations into the president go, it was reported last night that the Trump inaugural committee, which raised $107 million for the president's inauguration in 2017, has been subpoenaed. It's a very wide-ranging subpoena suggesting a very serious criminal investigation. You know, does something like that maybe affect his mood for this speech? Does it make him a little bit more defiant when it comes to hitting back against his critics? I wouldn't expect him to bring this up, but you might see that reflected in the tone of the speech if he does get a little bit more tough on Democrats.
All right, well, we will be watching tonight. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
That's Aaron Blake, senior political reporter at The Washington Post.